Greetings and welcome to the Cancer Interviews podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Morton, and on this segment, we're going to hear from a woman who survived ovarian cancer, one of many forms of ovarian cancer. She is Jane Ludemann from Dunedin, New Zealand. Her story is one we want you to hear, and a story we hope that you will find to be educational and inspirational. So now let's get started. And Jane, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you for having me.
Jane, we always like to start our interviews off from the same place. We want to personalize you a little bit, get to know you a little bit, exclusive of your cancer journey. So if you would, give us a thumbnail sketch of where you're from, what you like to do with your leisure time, what you do for work, that sort of thing.
Okay, so I grew up in the countryside on a farm in North Otago, which is the bottom third of New Zealand. We farm sheep and also dairy. And I went to a very small school of 40 people for my primary elementary school, and then to a slightly larger school with 500 at high school. And when I finished high school, I studied, first of all, in Dunedin, where I now live, mathematics with some chemistry and history. And then I went up to Auckland, which is our largest city, and trained as an optometrist. And up until 2 years ago, that's what I was working as.
Now, let me ask you this, because I've heard this many times. I did not grow up on a farm, but I've heard about those who have, especially when they're school-aged, that you could have a very full day of farm duties and school. Is that what it was like for you?
I was pretty lucky in that respect. I think my parents definitely, farms are really hard work, and I used to in the holidays help out and milk cows. It was good incentive for university study, certainly, because it is really hard work. But yeah, there are lots of really nice things about being on a farm too. I had lots of pet lambs, and yeah, it's quite a good way to grow up, I think.
Would you say that helped to shape your work ethic in any way?
I think my parents were always very hard workers, and that, yeah, I think that probably did have an influence.
Now, if you like what you hear on this segment, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the links below. Once there, you will see a bell icon, and if you click on that, we will notify you anytime we post an interview. Now, if you would, Jane, talk about life before your diagnosis, a life free of cancer. If you would, describe what your health was like, describe what your life was like.
Yeah, well, I think I had a really good life. When I trained as an optometrist, I worked both in a hospital setting and private practice around New Zealand, but I also spent a year working in Canada in a small town called Digby in Nova Scotia. And I loved optometry. It was a really good career. I think when people think of optometry, obviously they connect it with glasses, and that's certainly a large part of what we do. But the course itself is 5 years long, and that's because there's a really large health element to it. And a lot of there's a lot of probably... It's quite nice because a lot of what we see is routine, and then a lot of the time we'll get the opportunity to intervene earlier to stop people from having significant problems. And yeah, so you see diabetics, and you maybe, there were certainly some people where I found their cancer. There are obviously lots of eye diseases that we could treat and manage. And so most people go in and, you see the optometrist, you need glasses, you don't need glasses, and that's the only interaction you have. But there's certainly a small segment of the population and people that we're seeing that we get to make a much larger impact in their life through that. In terms of when I wasn't working, I've always really enjoyed the outdoors, and so I do a lot of in New Zealand, we call it tramping, but I think in the US, you'd say hiking, a lot of overnight hikes. And I also rock climb. I really enjoy rock climbing and skiing. and being outdoors. I was, it would be probably 2000 and I'm not exactly certain off the top of my head, 2015, I moved back to New Zealand from Nova Scotia, and I worked in Wellington, which is the capital city of New Zealand, as an optometrist. And it was there that I met my now husband. We met through Tinder, and I met up for coffee, and yeah, he's amazing actually, and we got to know each other and went for walks. He really enjoys the outdoors as well. And yeah, then I got offered, we hadn't been dating very long, and I got offered a job in Dunedin, and I asked if we're still together, in a year's time, and I get this job, would you move down with me? And he was like, yeah. And I discovered a week later that he'd never visited the city. So I thought that was a really good sign. So I think I really enjoyed the outdoors. I'm quite social. I enjoy, I used to host dinner parties and have 10, 12, 15 people over for dinner and cook for them. And yeah.
So it sounds like life was good, and yet at some point you must have had an inkling, or maybe more than an inkling, that something wasn't right. What happened, and how did that manifest itself?
Yeah, so for about 2 years, maybe a bit longer, I just started to have very, very subtle symptoms. To begin with, I noticed a change in my bowel habits, and I went and talked to my doctor, and they're like, oh no, we think that's fine, don't worry about it. I think maybe they did an iron level test and that was normal. And then I started to have problems. I guess the thing with ovarian cancer, often the symptoms can be quite subtle to begin with, and probably insidious, and that they're certainly not alarming symptoms. And so I noticed that I was needing to pee more and go. I would finish my morning working, and then the first thing I would do would be to go to the bathroom. And it's easy to kind of justify those things away. It's like, oh, it's warm in my office, I'm just drinking a bit more, or you try and find the explanations about it, and the doctor wasn't concerned. And so I just sort of went on with life. And then I started to get a bit more tired as well. And I thought it was because I was the kind of person I had a very busy life. I used to get up at 6:30 in the morning and go off and do a spin class and then go and work a full day. I was studying for my master's part-time. I had an active social life, and I spent 2 weeks volunteering overseas in Samoa. And so I thought that it was just that I'd been working really hard. I hadn't really had a holiday. And my friends used to laugh about it, because I used to, if we went to a movie, I'd always fall asleep in the movie. But I guess it was certainly a kind of funny tiredness, in that I could push through it, but yeah, it definitely was noticeable. And so those symptoms were around, I had them for about a year, and then I started to, in addition, notice that I wasn't able to eat as much, and I'd feel full after dinner, but I'd also, I guess to compensate for that, started snacking more because I couldn't eat as much and I'd get hungry, and I was exercising a lot and doing all the things that I was doing. And so I was just like, I'm not hungry because I only ate an hour or two ago. And again, very easy to kind of explain away. I saw the doctor about it. They weren't concerned. I started to have these intermittent stomach, I guess, pains. They were almost twinges where I just feel like something wasn't quite right, and I might like pause a little and then sort of push through, and after 20-30 minutes, maybe an hour, it would go away and I'd feel completely normal again. And I now know that that was because I had a free-moving tumor, and it was twisting the ovary, and then when it shifted back, those symptoms would go away, and the tiredness got worse, the bowel changes got worse, the needing to pee. I was getting up in the middle of the night quite often, at least once, to go to the bathroom. All of those things progressively got worse, and I think I was still doing everything that I'd done in my life. I wasn't exercising as much, and I was just like, oh, I'm just tired, I need a break. I'm unfit because I'm not doing as much, although it was actually the cancer. It's interesting to look back at things and be like, oh yeah, that was actually the cancer. It wasn't just that I wasn't exercising as much because of the cancer fatigue. And so I kept going back to the doctor, and I was by this stage getting a bit more concerned, and I actually summoned up the courage to ask them, well, could I have cancer? And and at that stage, I guess I'd been Googling as well, and I'd come up with what I kept finding was bowel cancer. And so I asked, well, could I have bowel cancer? And they're like, no, you're too young. Like, this isn't, your symptoms don't sound like this. This isn't anything. It's, it's either a cyst, and they're always harmless, or you might have diverticulitis, and we won't worry about that unless you get a fever. You're okay. And so I just had this sneaking feeling where I felt like I was a hypochondriac, because I kept going and seeing the doctor, and they kept saying, there's nothing wrong. But also I didn't stop pushing, and I don't know about in the US, but in New Zealand there's a bowel cancer screening test, and you can get that either there's a program, and I think it's for maybe over 50s or over older age, but you can buy the test from the pharmacies as well. And so I went and I found a pharmacy and bought it, and I remember one of my workplaces was across the road from a pharmacy, but the pharmacist was my patient, and I didn't want her thinking I was a hypochondriac as well, which is kind of silly to think about it now. And so I drove across town to a different pharmacy, and that test came back normal. And so I was like, well, maybe my doctor's right. Maybe I just need to stop worrying about this. But the symptoms kept getting worse. And at that time, it was when I was moving to start my new job in Dunedin. And so we packed up a house and took the ferry across and started driving down the South Island, and we stopped overnight at my now brother-in-law's house and stayed the night there. And I remember waking up and feeling really, really excited, because we were about, I was in this great relationship. I was about to start this amazing job that I loved, and everything in life was really good. And then I got the pain, and this time it didn't go away. It just got worse and worse, and I ended up on the bathroom floor, not able to move, screaming in pain. And my husband, he got me in the car and took me to a doctor's, and they called the hospital, and I was sent, we drove about 2 hours to get to the nearest hospital, and I had emergency surgery. And so before the surgery, there was some talk my symptoms got better again, and they weren't sure whether they were going to send me back home or not. But then they gave me a scan, and that found that I had a 6 centimetre mass on my ovary. And at that time, they told me that they were going to take the whole ovary out. And so I I woke up from surgery and was told, great news, we removed this mass that was causing you problems. We don't think it's cancer. I was able to save your ovary, and that's great news. But in doing so, we ruptured the mass, but that's okay because we don't think it's cancer. It's a fibroid. We see them all the time. And so they sent me on my way, and I had quite a slow recovery, and I was quite unusually fatigued, and it was quite difficult. And what came back, they said that they were going to get back in 2 weeks, but it actually, it ended up being a month. And what was happening behind the scenes was that they had examined what had been removed and realised that actually it wasn't just a benign fibroid, but it was a lot more serious. And so they sent it to Australia and got some Australian pathologists to look at it as well and confirm the diagnosis. And then, by that stage, I had done some reading on the blood tests that they got me to do, and had read a little bit, I guess, about ovarian kind of masses, and was getting a bit concerned. And they called us in to the gynecological oncologist. So that's a gynecologist who does extra training in gynecological cancers, and that was when they told me that actually I had ovarian cancer.
Now, you had mentioned the physical pain that came with this, but getting this horrible news, obviously it doesn't affect you in a positive way, it affects you in a negative way. But if you can quantify this and articulate it, how difficult was this news mentally and emotionally?
Yeah, well, very difficult. I think with any cancer diagnosis, it's obviously it's a really hard thing to receive, because it's a big and scary thing to be told. For me, I think the difficult thing is that my cancer is usually not survivable, and so I have a rarer type of cancer called Low-Grade Serous Carcinoma that makes up about 5% of ovarian cancers, and it's most of the time it doesn't respond well to treatment, and so it's slow growing. But I think it was. I remember sitting in the doctor's office and her telling me, this is okay. We've got a woman with your cancer that she's still alive 11 years later. And I remember thinking, I'm 32. 11 years, that's not a long time when you're 32. You're thinking about living 30, 40, 50 years from now. And so, it's devastating. Really, really devastating to get that news.
So in terms of the treatment process, despite this horrific news, did the treatment go as well as it possibly could?
So I have a type of cancer that's considered somewhat resistant to chemotherapy, and there hasn't been much research. There isn't a lot of data for the doctors, but I guess they know that chemotherapy often doesn't cure it, and so they instead put me on a different type of treatment. And so I remember they refused to give me chemotherapy because they didn't think that it would help at this stage. And so I have been on a treatment for the past 4 years that's called a hormone inhibitor. And so what this drug does is it removes all the estrogen from my body. I should mention that I had a second surgery as well. So once they realized it was cancer, they went in and they removed the ovary. And at that stage, they thought that the cancer hadn't spread. And if it hadn't spread, then my chances would have been really good. At stage 1, it's about a 90% survival if it's caught really early. But unfortunately, it had spread. So they put me on this drug that they normally use. It's actually a breast cancer drug, and they normally give it to women post-menopause, in part because the side effects aren't great, but it's meant to be more effective in my cancer. And so I've been on that for the past 4 years, and it's not an easy treatment, I think, in the sense that it does have lots of side effects. To give one example, my bone density, so the strength of my bones, dropped 10% in 9 months. So I had to have an infusion for that, which then gave me heart palpitations, and I began to almost faint and lose my vision. But thankfully that resolved with time, and we're monitoring that, and I'm probably going to have another one of those soon, which I'm not really looking forward to. And there are a lot of, it causes joint pain, and it can cause fatigue and a lot of other issues. But I think if I think back to what my quality of life was like before cancer, then there's a huge difference into what it's like now. But if I just look at what I can do now and think of that in isolation, I'd say my quality of life is still pretty good. I'm certainly really lucky that I can still rock climb and go hiking and do those things that I really enjoy. And I think, I guess I've kind of had to come to a realization that this is the best probably that my quality of life will be. And so I have to make the most of this time, because in all likelihood, it's not always going to be as good as this. So I'm trying to make the most of that and live in the present as much as I can.
Our guest is Jane Ludemann of Dunedin, New Zealand. She has survived ovarian cancer, and we hope that you find her story to be uplifting and helpful. And we want to get back to you. Jane, you talked about some of the things that you can do. You can still rock climb, as a for instance. What are some of the things you can't do?
So I think it's probably, there are certain things like I can't get pregnant and have children, and that's very hard when you're in your 30s. I think the cancer drug, it's not as, how do I put this? Like I think I've adjusted my lifestyle quite a lot to manage those side effects, and I'm really in awe of the woman with this cancer who managed to work full time on this medication. And so I think you get to a point where you can't do everything in life. And so you prioritize things and you come up with coping strategies. My short-term memory isn't very good anymore. And so I find I need to I use my phone calendar, and I set up multiple alerts so that I don't forget stuff. And so I think there's a lot of things that, I think most things I guess I can still do, but there are probably a lot of extra coping strategies and things aren't probably just as easy and intuitive as what they used to be.
Jane, now, if somebody's diagnosed with breast cancer, there are all sorts of support avenues for them. I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, same thing for me. But what about people who are diagnosed with ovarian cancer or specifically low-grade serous carcinoma? What kind of support avenues exist for people in your situation?
Yeah, so there's certainly, there are some, obviously, the very general cancer support charities in some cancers, some countries, do have very good charities for ovarian cancer support as well. In the US, there's a great charity called Steps Through OC that run they actually, I think they do it by video conferencing, which is probably quite good in this day and age, counselling for women with ovarian cancer, which is great. But there's not as much support as there would be for breast cancer, certainly. And I think it's sometimes a little bit of a touchy subject for women with ovarian cancer, because while we are very grateful for all the support and all the research and all the wraparound services for women with breast cancer, I think sometimes there's a contrast in the availability of services for women with ovarian cancer and the visibility of their disease. And so it can sometimes be a little bit difficult. I guess you look over at the fence and wish that we also had that level. But yeah, there are some really good charities that are trying to do the best they can with quite limited resources in comparison. And certainly there are lots of online support groups. And so I guess there's some gaps women themselves have tried to fill those. And so if you go on Facebook and search ovarian cancer, you'll come up with lots of patient-led support groups where women are helping other women with this disease.
Now, different people react different ways, or they are affected in different ways by their respective cancer journeys. In your case, you've made a decision to stand up for those who are or may be experiencing an ovarian cancer journey. If you would, tell us about what you're doing, Jane.
Yes. So when I was diagnosed, one of the first things I did was look for research and information about my cancer. And I discovered that there wasn't a lot of research about. And so as a family, one of the first things I did, we actually went to Texas and visited MD Anderson Cancer Center, because there's a doctor there who's quite experienced in my specific cancer. And I knew that when you have a cancer that, particularly I guess when you're young and you have a cancer that doctors don't see a lot of, and there isn't a lot of information about it, I guess that the best opinion I could get would be by going to see someone who'd seen more of it. And so as a family, that's what we did. And when we got back and I discovered that there wasn't much research, as a family, we made a donation to this doctor's research program. And then I wanted to ask friends and family to be able to fundraise and support research on it as well. And I looked really hard and I couldn't find any organisation where I'd know that if I directed them to it, that at least a small bit of their donation would actually go to my specific type of cancer. And it's probably important here to say that while I have ovarian cancer is about 30 different types of cancer, and there are some things that we all have in common. Certainly the difficulty to get a diagnosis is something that unfortunately a lot of women experience, and the regret and just those things are something that we all have in common. There are some types of ovarian cancer which are very treatable, but unfortunately the long-term outcome isn't good. So a lot of us have those kind of issues in common, but the actual treatments of the cancer can really differ, the age groups that they affect, and the underlying biology of the different types of cancer. So my experience with low-grade serous carcinoma will have some similarities to other women with different types of ovarian cancer, but there are also a lot of differences with it too. And so I wanted to make sure, to ask my friends and family to donate and raise money for my specific type of ovarian cancer. And yeah, there wasn't anywhere in the world that I could direct them to do that. And so I decided to make one, and I got in touch with the researchers around the world and worked with them to partner with institutes, and also created an organisation called Cure Our Ovarian Cancer, and got other women with my cancer on board, and we're doing our best to fundraise for research to try and raise money so that these researchers can find better treatments and improve our survival.
So if somebody watching or listening now would want to learn more about your organization, what is its web address, and what's other information you can give somebody who's interested in following through?
So the web address is cureourovariancancer.org. So that's cureour ovariancancer.org.
And that's all one word.
All one word, no dashes, all connected. Yeah, and so I think if anyone has low-grade serous ovarian cancer and is watching that, that's a great place to go to find resources about our cancer and support groups specific to that. If you have a different type of ovarian cancer, the Inspire forum's really good, Facebook's really good, and I would tell people to try and educate themselves and find out as much about the specific ovarian cancer that they can. And yeah, if anyone's watching this and they've just been diagnosed, I mean, it's such a really difficult cancer to get. But I think going through this, you also realize that you're so much stronger than you ever could have imagined. And there's a lot of personal strength, and you think that things will break you, but actually you manage. And certainly if anyone is struggling, psychologists, that's not something that I'd had anything to do with before I was diagnosed, but a good psychologist really is worth their weight in gold, because there's obviously the real physical difficulties with this diagnosis, but the mental difficulties, how to live well on a day-to-day basis while this is hanging over you, are really difficult as well. And so they can really help you get perspective and live well as well as you can, in spite of what might be happening with your cancer.
Okay, Jane, we always start our interviews from the same point, and we try ending them in the same place. And as is our custom, the way we like to end is, imagine for a moment that you have a private audience with someone who has just been diagnosed with low-grade serous carcinoma. If there's one overarching message you have for them, one point you want to drive home, what would that be?
Yeah, I think what I said just before, that to reach out to the support group and find the best information you can about this cancer. But probably the most important thing is that you're not alone. There are thousands, tens of thousands of women with this cancer around the world, and certainly hundreds of women in the support group who are all reaching out and helping each other. And yeah, it's hard, but there are lots of people out there who know what you're going through and understand it, and would be really happy to speak to you and help.
All right, Jane, thanks so much. We've been hearing from Jane Ludemann of Dunedin, New Zealand. And that's going to wrap up this segment of Cancer Interviews. We hope that what you heard can aid the cancer journey for yourself or for a loved one. And Jane, thanks so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for having me.
Thank you, Jane. And until next time, we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews Podcast.